Happy Earth Day, everyone. Happy Earth Day, and welcome to Spring Docs. I'm Jackie LaFaro, Director of the Hamptons Take Two Doc Fest, where our new mantra now is all docs, all year. Lucky you. We know it's a beautiful day outside, and you'd probably like to be in the garden and doing all kinds of fresh air activities, but trust me, you will be transported today to the mysterious depths of the ocean and to the tree canopies where the nearly extinct, Philippine eagle lives. But first, I want to thank our very own Martyrs for their partnership as our exclusive sponsor in bringing you today's Earth Day films. Our first film is Mission Blue, and it will take you on a deep dive into a world most of us can't see or experience. But with Dr. Sylvia Earle and Dr. Safina, who is with us today, you'll encounter this magical realm without getting wet. Following the film, Safina will give a very special Earth Day talk. We're lucky to have Carl with us, who is now the first endowed professor for Nature and Humanity at Stony Brook University. His writing and speaking about the living world has won him the MacArthur Genius Prize, Pew, and Guggenheim Fellowships. Please don't miss what he has to tell us about saving our Earth, our seas, and our planet.
I've seen that film a few times, and every time I see it quite differently. It's really interesting. I can give you one little insight into Sylvia. I once said to her, Sylvia's more than 20 years older than I am, I guess, and I once said to her, Sylvia, when I grow up, I want to be like you. And she said, oh, well, the secret is never grow up. That's classic Sylvia Earle. So that film had its emotional ups and downs. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So I thought maybe what I would do here, I was asked to read something. I'm going to read to you a little bit from my most recent book, which is called Beyond Words, which is about what animals think and feel. And one of the reasons that I wrote the book the way that I did is to try to let the animals, which, they never speak for themselves, but I wanted to let them make their own case for their own existence. And that, in a way, is the pose or the poise of the book. And Sylvia's a scientist. She's doing a lot of stuff that isn't particularly scientific. She's not doing work in laboratories anymore. She's looking at the big picture. And I thought that partly because the movie is a little rough in spots emotionally, I, as a scientist, would read from the least scientific part of this book. In fact, the chapter is titled Woo Woo, and it's about magical, unexplained, inexplicable things about killer whales. I thought killer whales would be good to talk about because they're called killer whales, and they were the most feared of all sea creatures, at least up until Jaws. Everybody thought if you step into the sea, the thing that's most likely to get you is a killer whale, which they certainly are capable of slurping people. But the weird thing is that no free-living killer whale has ever hurt a human being. And they've had plenty of opportunities to be near and with and around us. So this is from the book, and I'm talking here at first with a scientist who has studied killer whales, which a lot of people prefer to call orcas. He has studied them for 40 years, and I asked him a little bit about, has he ever had things happen that left him with a particularly deep and moving feeling about them? And he says, I've sometimes, his name is Ken, I've sometimes come away, Ken says, with a real wow feeling, like I just seen something above and beyond. When you lock eyes with them, you get the sense that they're looking at you. It's a steady gaze, and you feel it, much more powerful than a dog looking at you. A dog might want your attention. The whales, it's a different feeling. It's more like they're searching inside you. There's a personal relationship that sets up with eye contact. A lot transmits in a very brief time about the intent on both sides. Like what, I say? In those looks I've felt, he hesitates, appreciated. But of course, he quickly says, that's subjective. Appreciated? Ken started his research in the 1970s, right after the courts ordered SeaWorld to stop catching baby whales. Within a year or so, Ken says, if someone in another boat started chasing the whales each time they surfaced or began aggressively circling them, they would often come over and just stay around our boat. The whales understood that we weren't going to be involved in high-speed chases. We weren't going to be shooting any darts and tags. They saw, Ken says, that we were cool around them, which implies, a consciousness of what's going on. Could that consciousness encompass a sense of Ken's goodwill? After everything they'd been through with the captures, could they have appreciated Ken enough to return a favor? Ken has stories like this one. Quote, for days we'd been following all three pods. They'd come in the Strait of Juan de Fuca up the west side of San Juan Island through Boundary Pass to the Fraser River, gone back down to Rosario into Puget Sound, around Vashon Island, then come back up here. One morning, they were headed into a dense fog bank. We followed them. This was in the 1970s, no GPS or anything, just a compass. We got lost down near the entrance to Admiralty Inlet, socked in fog, about 25 miles from home. I knew the approximate compass bearing. We put away all the cameras and prepared to run. I started to head along that compass bearing at about 15 knots. We'd only gone for about 5 minutes when the whales just came porpoising in from all directions until they were right in front of the boat. So I just slowed down and followed wherever they went. I had half a dozen of them right in front of the bow at all times. Ken followed them 15 miles. When the fog opened, he could see his home island. Well, he says, I do have the feeling they knew absolutely that we had zero visibility. They knew exactly where they were. It was the year after the captures ended. They'd seen lots of boats and been subject to a lot of aggressive behavior. But there they were, and as far as I can tell, they were guiding us home. It was very touching. It gets, if anything, more touching and much stranger. Fact is, killer whales seem capable of random acts of kindness, acts that defy explanation, acts that make scientists consider some pretty far-out possibilities. It can seem that killer whale behavior falls into two categories, amazing behavior and inexplicable behavior. Fog guidance can seem like an exclusive service that killer whales feel inclined to provide to people who work to protect them. Once, while Alexandra Morton, who is another researcher who lives in Canada, and an assistant were out in the open water of Queen Charlotte Strait in an inflatable boat when she was enveloped by fog so thick she felt like she was in a glass of milk, she also had no compass. She had no view of the sun. It was flat calm, there were no wave patterns, and a wrong guess about the direction home would have brought them out into the open ocean. Then, as if from nowhere, a smooth black fin popped up. Topnotch, then Saddle, then Eve, the usually aloof matriarch. Then Sharky was suddenly peeking at her, and then Stripe. As they clumped close around her tiny boat, Alexandra rolled in the fog like a blind person with a hand on their shoulder. I never worried, she recalled. I trusted them with our lives. 20 minutes later, they saw a materializing outline of their island's massive cedars and rocky shoreline, and the fog opened up, and the whales left them. Earlier in the day, the whales had been unusually difficult to follow and had been traveling west toward the open ocean. The whales had taken Morton south to her home. When the whales left, they changed direction toward where they'd just come from and where they had been headed. Morton felt changed. For more than 20 years, she says, I have fought to keep the mythology of the orcas out of my work. When others would regale a group with stories of an orca's sense of humor or music appreciation, I'd hold my tongue. Yet there are times when I'm confronted with profound evidence of something beyond our ability to scientifically quantify. You can call them amazing coincidences if you like, but for me, they keep adding up. I can't say that whales are telepathic, I can barely say that word, but I have no explanation for the day's events. I have only gratitude and a deep sense of mystery that continues to grow, she said. And then there are stories of killer whales seemingly retrieving lost dogs. Once, a small party of scientific people left shore to go whale watching in a small boat. When they returned, their German shepherd, Phoenix, was not on the island. He'd apparently tried to follow them out into the big and powerful waters of Johnstone Strait. The people searched the strait until 11 at night, no dog. The dog's owner was sitting on a log crying when he heard the blows of killer whales. He thought the worst, that they might have eaten his beloved dog. He could see the whales coming closer because the turbulence of their swimming caused the sea's phosphorescent creatures to glow. Just after the whales passed, he heard splashing. Suddenly, there stood his sodden dog, weakened and vomiting salt water. "I don't care what people say," he declared. "Those whales saved my dog." And that's not an isolated case. At a different research camp, a person went kayaking, and when he returned, his dog, named Kramer, was missing. Similarly, she'd probably tried to swim after him. The researcher was mourning the loss of his faithful companion late in the night when some whales passed. The dog appeared on the beach soaked and trembling and near collapse. "I was there," said the person who related the story. "There's no doubt in my mind, those whales had pushed Kramer ashore." There are other weird stories, too. In the early 80s, a marine amusement park wanting whales to train for shows started asking for permission to resume capturing them, and they particularly had their sights set on a family called the A4 group. This was a few years after the whale captures had been banned. That family had already suffered a lot from the days of capture. The mere suggestion of catching some of those whales that Alexandra Morton had often seen, years after they had been saved, set her blood boiling. At a meeting, even her own friends told her to calm down. Over the years, there was only one major waterway where Alexandra Morton had not seen killer whales, a place called Kramer Passage, which happened to be where she lived. 2 days after the meeting where she'd spoken so passionately against their capture, Morton was following 2 whales called Yakat and Kelsey, who were sisters of the whale A10. In front of the inlet to Kramer Passage, the whales started milling around. Morton drifted with them, and then they suddenly trapped her with the 2 sisters on either side and their youngster broadside in front of the boat, all of them just inches away. Each time she tried to start the engine, they started buzzing around, keeping her trapped. They reminded her of killer whales making a kill, and it unnerved her. But then they turned, leading her into Kramer Passage and traveling up and down Kramer Passage 3 times. She says, "Sometimes I don't know what to believe with killer whales." She allowed herself to wonder, were the whales trying to communicate something after she'd defended their family? She'd spoken at a meeting, not even out in a boat where the whales, if they could understand English, might have overheard her. Knowing her thoughts while she watched them would require true telepathy. That, she knew, quote, flew in the face of reason. As Ken Balcom might have said, Alexandra Morton was deep into woo-woo territory, and she knew she was. She wrote, "I know this has no place in science, or even a sound mind maybe, but could our parameters on reality be set just a little too tight?" Decades earlier, while watching 2 captive whales named Orky and Corky swim around their Marineland pool one day, Alexandra Morton had asked a trainer to show her how one teaches a new idea to a whale. Corky was the captured child of Stripe, and many years later, in the incident I just mentioned, Stripe would help lead Morton home in the fog. Neither Morton nor the trainer had ever seen either captive whale slap its dorsal fin on the water. They decided they would work on that trick the following week. And then something happened, Morton later wrote, that has made me careful of my thoughts around killer whales ever since. Corky rose and slapped her dorsal fin on the water's surface. She did it several times more and then charged around the tank, exuberantly smacking the water with her dorsal fin. That's whales for you, the trainer said. They can read your mind. We trainers see this kind of stuff all the time. Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm sure we have just a couple of minutes left for questions before we have to clear out. So, anybody want to know anything about anything?
How old a woman is she today?
Sylvia is 80, almost 85, at least 83, I think. And she is completely ridiculous. She lacks the gene that makes you tired. I was at her 75th birthday party, which was at a film festival, and at night, after all the films, which was about 10 o'clock, they threw a party for her. I left at 2. She was dancing when I left. And I heard the next day that at 4, the woman who was traveling with her dragged her away because at 5, Sylvia had to get on a plane and go give another talk someplace. So that's the way she is. And I've been diving with her, and she's not, she doesn't seem any different than she would have seemed if she was 40, She's truly extraordinary. Yes?
Are there any hope spots in our area? Is Plum Island slated to be any kind of a marine reserve?
No, and actually, I don't know where the closest one of the hope spots that Sylvia has been working on is. There are a lot of people trying to get Plum Island saved from development because the federal government is trying to sell it to private individuals. I should probably not mention that in Sag Harbor, where people could actually buy it. But there are a lot of people trying to get it protected as a national wildlife refuge, including some of the water around it. But that's still in flux. So, yeah. And we have on this coast, I'm not even sure I know of any actual marine reserves north of Florida on this coast. There are some places that are protected from certain things. There's a place way in about 150 miles southeast of Montauk that President Obama designated as a national monument. They're trying to undo that designation right now. You know who they is. And there are some places in New England where you can't use certain gear in some places, but that's more of a fishery management thing than a really closed area type of place. Where areas are closed, I've been to some closed areas, and they are, I've been to Cabo Polmo, for instance. It's completely remarkable, the recovery there. Well, let me layer on all this bad news some relatively good news. First of all, ever since the Americas were first found by, the first Europeans to come to the Northeast were people who came cod fishing and kept it secret as long as they could, and then the secret got out. And then eventually, much later, people started settling. So let's just say that was 500 years ago. We are the first generation in 500 years who can say that there are more fish in our water now than when we were kids. And that is true for quite a few of the inshore species. the ones that are really popular to catch right now, that's true for. It's not true for some others that are, first of all, suffering because the water is getting warmer, like lobsters and winter flounder, those flounder that used to pave the bottom when we were young. It's too warm for them now. It's too warm for lobsters. It's too warm for a few others. Black sea bass, they were mainly, their main center of abundance was off the Carolinas, and now they're moving north, so we see more and more and more of those. The main thing that people around here could do, I would say, two things, in addition to just supporting really good limits and good fishery management, because it does work. That's why there are more of many of these fish, is to not use fertilizers, because what is really degrading the water quality is the fertilizers. The dangerous algal blooms that are starting to happen are mainly because there's too many people using fertilizer. And there's a lot more people here, obviously, than there used to be. So that's the main thing. Don't use fertilizers, don't use pesticides, and I would say also support clean energy, decentralized clean energy especially. That's a slightly longer discussion. I don't really have time to open that one up, but those are the things that I would say. I think I'm kind of out of time. Am I out of time? Just about. Okay. Well, thank you very, very much. We'll be out in the lobby if you want to talk about anything. Hey, Mike, I didn't see you there. Thank you so much.